Matthew Owens back on the Ben Schneider Show. Man, it is so good to see you. I know we've been going back and forth on social media a lot over the last few months with all the media rights news and everything, and there's a lot I want to get into in our conversation here tonight. But how are you doing, first of all?
I am great. Thank you for having me again. Uh, we had cars on track at Indianapolis today, which just immediately puts a smile to my face. And like I was saying earlier, it's just been a huge day for media stuff, which just gets me going. More than sports these days, I pay attention and get excited by sports media.
Yeah, it's going to take me a couple days to get this up. So, I mean, the news has been dropping this week. Who knows what all is going to break in the next 24 to 48
Yeah.
hours here. But the first thing I want to start here is with here is a conversation I want to have with you for a long time because I know that again, this conversation comes up, every summer when NBC would come back to cover the second half of the NASCAR season. You obviously grew up a huge Jeff Gordon fan. I think anybody that follows you knows that. And you've told me uh before that there are dozens of reasons you could come up with why you are not particularly a fan of Dale Earnhardt Jr. So I guess the first thing before we get into how Dale fits into the media landscape here, how does a kid from North Carolina, which is Earnhardt country, grow up rooting for Jeff Gordon in that Earnhardt-Gordon rivalry? And I'm
Ooh,
not going to ask you to give me dozens of reasons here for the purposes of this podcast, but could you maybe just give me two or three reasons why you're not such a big Dale Jr. fan?
great question. Yeah, how did I become a Jeff Gordon fan? That could be just an hour-long podcast on its own. I think it's always been just somewhere in the recesses of my mind to just like the team or the person that no one else likes. If you accept that as an answer, I'm a Duke fan. Always have been. No one likes them. Um, Jeff Gordon fan, of course. Uh, as you said, it was a perfect time for that too. I was born in '97. Uh, I I have recollections of watching races in 2000 at age 3, which is amazing that I can remember that, but nothing else like what I'm going to the store for. But that's another story. Uh, and he was winning all the time, and as you said, here in North Carolina, no one liked him. They certainly loved Earnhardt and, of course, Earnhardt Jr. Uh, this is an interesting topic. Everyone now in 2024 looks at Dale Earnhardt Sr. as everyone loved him. That wasn't really the case when he raced. He wasn't beloved by everybody. I mean, Bill Elliott won most popular driver all those years in a row. Um, but here he was obviously beloved and idolized. And of course that went on to Junior for many reasons. Um, and I don't know if I've said this to you before, but one of the best days that I hold fondly from my childhood is the Monday after the 2004 Aaron's 499.
I figured that was what you were gonna come up with
Yeah,
there.
that was just a glorious day going into school with all of the Earnhardt Jr. fans just very upset and blaming Brian Vickers and blaming NASCAR and blaming everything else. And of course, that's probably the race that created your favorite thing, overtime. Uh, um, I don't know, just for whatever dumb reason, I just like the team or whatever that nobody else likes. I was a Maria Sharapova fan too, and there was a lot of people that didn't like her for whatever reason too. So that kind of stuff sticks with me. As far as Earnhardt Jr. in the booth, now listen, I try my best to separate my sports fandom from the sports media side of things, in which I am obsessed with unhealthily. So obsessed with sports media. Um, don't think he's very good in the booth. I know that makes me public enemy number one these days. I'm sorry. I don't think he's had great direction. I don't think he's had great leadership. We've talked before on this show about my dislike of Rick Allen. That kind of bleeds into this. I don't think Rick has done a good job at all at controlling his booth and leading Earnhardt where he needs to go. Um, and I think you can point out many, many different bullet points of examples of how you could show this to someone and say, listen, he doesn't need to be talking here. Or if he is talking here, he needs to keep it to 2 words, 1 sentence, whatever it might be. Um, and I think that's something that you can teach out of an analyst. All of these analysts can be taught just as well as the play-by-players can be taught. I think of Troy Aikman, and I don't think Troy Aikman started off as a very good analyst at all, and I think he's turned into what he has turned into because he's been alongside Joe Buck for 20 years. And those two, one, have a chemistry and a friendship that they can play off each other, but Joe's obviously one of the greatest play-by-play voices of all time. He has taught Troy a lot in that booth. I don't know what Dale has been taught. I don't think whatever it is has clicked. And just there are times where he goes way out of control and way out of bounds in the not out of bounds saying dumb stuff, out of bounds as far as it is how a booth is supposed to be constructed and how it's supposed to be run.
So let me be clear with everybody. I mean, and again, we've had this conversation, many times before. When I call myself a Dale Jr. fan, I'm speaking solely from my childhood memories with Dale as a driver. And of course, my number one was AJ Allmendinger, and I would say my number two was probably Dave Blaney because I was a fan of the underdogs. I loved his Golden Corral scheme and the Tommy Baldwin car, and I still to this day believe he got robbed of the 2012 Daytona 500. It was Tuesday morning, the track was on fire. I cannot believe that they restarted that race. Sorry to all the Matt Kenseth fans that are watching this, but I needed somebody to root for that, and I know it's ironic looking back that he went on such a long winless streak from 2008 to 2012, but I was like, well, I need somebody that at least has a reasonable chance of winning on most given Sundays, who's in a top ride. And so I liked the Cars movie. It's kind of what got me into the sport. Dale Jr. had a cameo in that, so kind of felt gravitated towards him. He was never my number one, but I still consider myself a fan of his. But I'm in total agreement with you in the booth, and I said this on Grid Tonight. The recent episode that we did when the Turner deal and Prime deal was announced. I have to admit, I thought the Chicagoland finish his first time in the NBC booth. It didn't bother me very much when it first happened. I thought the energy was a nice change of pace. He seemed excited to be there. I didn't really have much of a problem with it, but I think as time has gone on, and maybe the conversations with you have been a part of this as well, but I think my mentality and what I want to see out of a broadcast has certainly evolved and changed from the time when I was just a college freshman or sophomore to where I am now, getting more into the business side of things. And I can certainly see where you're coming from, and I think I'm in agreement with you. I don't think he's been that great in the booth, and maybe had a couple memorable moments here or there, but on the whole, I think has struggled to develop that chemistry. Now, I'll say this, and I think we talked about this last time you were on the show as well. I think they did him no favors, they being NBC, by putting him in the booth and not taking anybody out. And then on top of that, splitting the booth in half with him and Jeff Burton on one end of the room and Rick Allen and Steve Letarte on the other. I think there's too many cooks in the kitchen. I think that, a four-person booth, sometimes it can be a little bit harder to have control over that. And again, maybe that's not even on Rick Allen. Maybe that's on the production team over at NBC trying to squeeze all that talent into one broadcast there. But again, I want to get your thoughts on, drawing it back to the future here with, TNT and Prime and everything. You're obviously a huge Allen Bestwick fan. There have been some, I don't know if you call them rumors or if it's just wishful thinking at this point, because I know he's doing, UConn college basketball. He's on the PA at IMS now. So it's not like he's unemployed. He's got plenty of work that's keeping him busy, but I'm sure a lot of fans would love to see him back. I'm a little concerned that, the issues that I have with Junior in the booth and the fact that he's done this for 6 years, and I don't know, maybe being a year removed because he's taking a year off and just doing his podcast and everything, maybe that would make it a little bit easier to change his style up as he comes into a new network and is paired with new people. But do you think that, putting Allen Bestwick there, who's obviously got a tremendous amount of experience, is very well respected, do you think that that alone is something that could, in your estimation, for lack of better terms, fix Junior in the booth and make him a little bit more desirable to listen to in your mind?
The short answer is yes. And I'll give you a little bit of a longer answer to that, and
Sure.
I'll just draw you back to 2001. Wally Dallenbach in the booth for NASCAR Cup Series races in 2001 would have really had people scratching their heads. What has Wally Dallenbach done? With all respect to Wally Dallenbach, he never contender week in and week out in the Cup Series. He raced in other forms of motor racing, and competed better in other forms of racing than he did in NASCAR. And if you go back and listen, don't watch, pull up some races from 2001 NBC and TNT races. Don't get caught up in what's happening in the race. Just close your eyes, listen to the broadcast. Wally is hardly there sometimes. He is out, and it is Allen, and it is BP, and it is pit road. And almost magically, by the time we get to Daytona in 2002, Wally is on it. Wally has started to become a better broadcaster, and I would say certainly by the time we got to 2003, he was very comfortable in the booth. He knew where he was, how he should sound, what he should be saying, and he also knew how to play with both off of Allen and Benny Parsons. We know Benny was a huge character, lovable character, and he knew how to play off of him as well. And again, I'm sure some of that was probably Benny. I would have to think Benny talked to him many times and told him, this is what, this is kind of the diagram of what you need to do and how to get better. And I'm sure producers and directors and everything else, but I've always believed play-by-play person takes control of what happens in a booth. And I think Allen had a big part of making Wally Dallenbach really good. I truly thought Wally ended up being one of the best we've had as we went on through that initial run with NBC and TNT, and then into the TNT only days, 2007 to whatever it was, 14. I thought he was great. Thought he worked extremely well with Kyle Petty, obviously. Extremely well with Bill Weber, Ralph Shaheen, Adam Alexander. And again, I know a lot of people had something to do with that. I just think Allen had a lot to do with that. So, to circle that back, Allen Bestwick knows how to make good TV in NASCAR. And I think he would do wonders for Dale Earnhardt Jr. I think he would do wonders for anybody. But I really think he could work with Dale and make him, how do I want to say this? Because he's already a superstar. You can't deny that Dale is not a superstar in the booth because of just how many people love him and what networks are willing to give him. He could make him Benny Parsons. He could make him Benny Parsons. I think so. Because that's how big of a star I think people believe he is, and I think that's how good he could be.
It really kind of took me aback there when you said that, because I know that, and I see the tweets all the time too. People say Dale Earnhardt Jr. is this generation's Benny Parsons, and
Yeah.
it's not even a Dale Jr. thing. I don't BP was just one of one in my estimation. I don't know that anybody could be this generation's Benny Parsons when you're talking about a former driver that went into the booth and was just a complete natural and virtually universally loved and respected. I think it's very hard to come anywhere close to the standard that he set. But again, I do see what you're saying, and I think that again, there's a lot of pieces that still have to fall into this puzzle here, a lot of dominoes that still have to fall for 2025. Obviously, Junior's a big part of that, but Let's just speak hypothetically here. If you're talking about, a play-by-play man, and let's just say, obviously, we would all love to see Allen Bestwick come back, but he's already tied up with other commitments at this point in his career. He's not available. Who do you think, whether it's somebody currently at Turner or in the Prime family or whoever it might be, or whether it's a wild card, but you would bring in from another network, who do you think after Allen Bestwick would be your number two most desirable play-by-play man for that summer stretch of races coming up next year?
That's a tough question, and I'll tell you why it's tough. And I know you know this. We are running kind of thin on the up and coming broadcaster side in the motor
Yeah.
racing world. I mean, you look at any other sport. Now, granted, there's a huge volume of broadcasts that are available. I mean, you could watch any college baseball game you want, or any G League basketball game you want, or whatever. And there's just thousands of young broadcasters that are on those games that could be up and coming. One of the top young broadcasters that's on the rise right now is Mike Monaco. Oh my God, he does absolutely everything, and he goes everywhere. He does hockey, he does basketball, he does football, he does college baseball, he does everything. And there are, I don't want to over exaggerate, there's hundreds of examples of a Mike Monaco in stick and ball sports. I don't know where we get that in the auto racing world, in the NASCAR world, and motor racing as a whole. Because, yes, there are short tracks everywhere, and there's public address announcers everywhere for those tracks, and that's how everybody gets their start. Ken Squire and Mike Joy and Allen Bestwick and so on and so forth. But those people are, of course, not getting the opportunity to jump up and be on a Cup or an Xfinity or a truck race because Fox has their booth set and NBC has their booth set and so on. So it's really difficult to kind of just pluck out of the air a name that you could think works with Amazon and or TNT. Now, granted, I think we're all thinking that whoever they choose, they're going to do both. They're going to do Amazon and TNT. I think that's what everyone is at least assuming. Obviously, Adam Alexander has a background with TNT. He would he would fit. He would do well. He and you might have to correct me on this. He's probably worked with Junior before on Xfinity broadcast. Now it would be years ago, but he would fit. Um, Obviously the name Rick Allen is going to be thrown out there because Lee Diffie is taking over for Rick on NBC. Now apparently Rick is staying at NBC to do the Xfinity races after that change, but we don't know if that's just for this year, if that ends, next year. I don't know. And
I think Rick's
obviously,
been floated out with the CW. I think there's some rumors
yeah,
about it
yeah, and
over that,
that
but
that would make perfect sense, him going over to the CW. Again, I could go down the rabbit hole of telling you everything that could possibly happen here, but I won't because we'll be here until midnight. Um, but yeah, it's really difficult. You're probably, and especially if you're TNT and Amazon, you're wanting to establish a booth, just like Amazon did immediately with getting Al Michaels on Thursday Night Football. You'll probably see them do the same thing starting in a couple of years when they get the NBA. You're probably going to see them go after a Kevin Harlan or an Ian Eagle or a Brian Anderson or whoever, because it certainly seems as if TNT is going to lose the NBA. That's not official yet, but it feels that way. Amazon's going to get a piece, and they're probably going to say, hey, we need to get someone really good that everyone knows and loves, and they're probably going to go after one of those three, and my guess on that would be Kevin Harlan, but that's just a guess. Um, but who is that? Who is that in the NASCAR world other than Allen Bestwick? Because Adam Alexander, like I said, he could work. He's perfectly fine. I don't think everybody's tripping over themselves to hear Adam Alexander every week. And then after those two, who are there?
I mean, I guess the obvious answer would be Jamie Little, but I don't know that she's necessarily ready for that kind of promotion yet, given the kind of frosty reception she's received on the ARCA and truck broadcasts. I don't know. That's an interesting conversation I go back and forth with on a lot of on-air talent as well, because I think that a lot of times you maybe look at the pits and pit reporters and say, could you maybe promote one of them? And they've tried it with Jamie Little, they tried it with Vince Welch for a while, Fox Sports did, and Dr. Jerry Punch even, I think, to a certain extent. Although I thought Punch was okay in the booths, I certainly preferred him in the pits. It seemed to me that he was more comfortable there. Do you feel like that's a good pipeline, so to speak, to look for potential up and coming talent, or would you rather them maybe venture outside the auto racing world, or at least outside the NASCAR world, to try to find that voice for their play-by-play booths?
If you cannot get Allen Bestwick, I would think outside the box on this. You mentioned Pit Road, and yeah, Jerry Punch didn't get the best of reviews going from Pit Road to the booth. Some of it unfair, but also some of it fair. Vince Welch did not. Yeah, did not do well going from Pit Road to the booth. Jamie so far has not. I'm trying to think who else. Marty Reed would have, I guess, technically fit that. He wasn't in the pits every single week, but he had worked Pit Road before, and we don't need to go down that rabbit hole either of Marty Reed. I would think outside the box. I really would. I would go after someone that sports fans know, because as we know, Amazon and TNT, they are trying really hard to go after the casual fan and go after new fans and pull them in. I would go after someone that sports fans know. I would go after someone that knows the sport. You do not want to bring in someone just for name value that just knows nothing about the sport, that's going to insult, the every week fans. I'm telling you, I'd take a run at Kevin Harlan myself. That's just me. I would absolutely love it. And I think there would be something to that. Kevin Harlan, he's mentioned in the past, of course, he grew up in the Midwest. He's talked about in the past his adoration for listening to the Indianapolis 500 on radio. That's a starting point. It's not the same thing. It's not NASCAR on TV, but that's a starting point. I think people would love him. I think people would love Kevin Harlan on NASCAR. I can only just imagine what he could come up with.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up the Indy 500, because I guess we're going to be having the same conversation with IndyCar in the not too distant future, because there are some questions as to whether or not NBC is going to keep those rights. We're hearing some rumors that Fox may be interested. Maybe there's a wild card that we're not thinking of yet there. Although as far as I understand it, Penske Entertainment wants just one single entity or partner to do the entire broadcast, which I'm on the record saying I personally would rather see a second come in, so that you have some competition and the networks can hold each other accountable there. But yeah, I mean, Kevin Harlan, I think, is obviously a pro, and somebody that I would trust to be able to cover the sport with the respect that it deserves, and I would have no issue with him. I think it's probably, again, a long shot given how busy he is doing other things, but again, the only name that continues to really pop off the screen to me would probably be Allen Bestwick. But again,
Yeah.
at this point in his career, I think there is a question as to whether or not that's feasible in terms of being a likely option, or if they're going to have to pull from other current talent from different networks, or promote somebody else. Who knows what's going to happen? Like I said, I think, as far as I know, Dale Earnhardt Jr. is the only one that is officially announced to be a part of that. So we'll see what happens there. You kind of hinted at it with the idea that TNT, Amazon Prime are going after the casual fan here. I know that we got some news yesterday, as we're taping this Monday for everybody watching. The in-season tournament got announced. There have been some speculation on that on Sirius XM and some other places, given what the NBA introduced this previous season here, and the reception that it got, thinking that some other leagues might try to emulate that. And we have an answer here with NASCAR. And again, I don't need to ask, because I got your messages yesterday, but For the sake of the audience, what are your thoughts on what TNT is trying to do with the inaugural $1 million in-season tournament next year for NASCAR?
Yeah. Well, it's okay. So you got the messages from me like after the second after it was introduced or after it
Yeah.
was made official. I've had about 24 or so hours to think about it. I still don't like it, but I've had more time just to think about who was asking for this. The networks have to be the only people that were. I mean, I know I keep hearing some drivers, and I guess Denny Hamlin is the first one that comes to mind because he did the thing last year. I don't know if the drivers have been clamoring for this more than they've been clamoring for more horsepower, right? I don't think this was at the top of minds of the drivers, and they are banging the desk every time during the drivers' meetings.
Well, I think
Wanting,
Denny's just banging the desk because he feels like it was kind of his idea
yeah,
and exploded
exactly.
from there, but
Yeah, he
probably an
wants
exception to the
royalties.
rule there.
Yeah, he wants royalties, which is fine. Um, no, this is a TV thing, and as we know, TV rules all, and that's not just this sport. This is every sport. That's why we're seeing, oh my gosh, the amount of money that's being thrown at the SEC and the Big Ten by all of these networks and the NFL, and just getting massive numbers. And NASCAR's last rights deal was unbelievable numbers that they're going to pull in, and Amazon and TNT, more TNT. Um, they want something like this. Okay. My problem is it necessary? And I've thought a lot about what you and I have talked about yesterday from, well, you don't think the playoffs are necessary and overtime and stages and all of that, and I get that. You can mask those three things as saying we're trying to make the racing better, right? And you can at least give that as an excuse, and I can believe you. In fact, I do believe that with overtime and somewhat with the playoffs, even though that's a very slippery slope. Not so much the stages. But by the way, they told us the stages were brought in because it would help the TV networks know when cautions were, so they could get commercials in then and not have as many commercials during green flag racing. Well, I think we've grown to learn that that has not come true. But anyway,
Careful there. That's a whole nother rabbit hole.
yeah,
Go
yeah, I
down here.
know. But that has not cut out all these green flag commercials. Anyway, um, I just don't see how this makes anything better. I really don't. I could see, from a fan perspective, filling out the bracket, filling out a bracket's fun. That's why everybody loves March Madness. Filling out a bracket just physically is a fun thing to do. I don't know if it goes beyond that though, does it? I mean, I have many concerns, and they're all bouncing off the side of my head right now. The first of which is Bob Pockers tweeted that apparently an Atlanta summer race, could be part of this.
Yeah, that
I,
that I'm really not a fan of,
I,
given what Atlanta's become.
I can't even imagine that. Like whoever is in that TNT booth, God bless them, because we got side by side for the lead, and we got three wide for fifth, and we've got a big wreck about to happen at 16th. And oh, by the way, let's check in at 24th, where Eric Jones is battling in his first round bracket matchup with Alex Bowman. What does that do for anybody? I don't know if that does anything for me, except actually annoy me more because you're looking at that instead of a battle somewhere else. That's one thing that irks me a little bit. A second thing that irks me is when the playoffs were created, when this iteration of the playoffs was created in 2014 and then revised whatever it was 2017 or whatever, with playoff points and all of that, you made the regular season as meaningful as it possibly could be, which I love. I love a meaningful regular season. We might circle back to that in a minute. But you made it as intense and as meaningful as you possibly could. Every race is a huge deal because you can lock yourself into the playoffs by winning any race, whether it's the Daytona 500 or whether it's Michigan or Pocono or Bristol or wherever. They all count the same. There's drawbacks to that, which I'll get to. Um, but that makes the whole season flow almost perfectly, right? Because if you're a diehard NASCAR fan, I don't know if you can exactly start watching in the playoffs because you don't know how anyone got to the playoffs. I mean, when if you're a baseball fan or a casual baseball fan, you don't have to watch the 162 games. The Cubs made the playoffs. Well, how? They won their division by winning 95 games. Oh, okay. Good. But how did Martin Truex Jr. make the playoffs, and how was he the regular season champion? Well, he won at Bristol, and he won at Dover, and he won at Pocono. And then he won stages here, there, and everywhere else. And it's like, oh, you really need to follow this. Well, if you're following 26 races across a regular season, isn't that isn't the interest for your regular season already up? I don't see. I keep hearing the term juice up the regular season or spice up the regular season. There's too much spice. Just like food, there is such thing as too much spice. The regular season is just about perfect as it is for what you want the season to be to lead into the playoffs. You don't need any of this other stuff. You don't need a Sweet 16. And I don't even want to get even started into what could really be just a ridiculous happening if Atlanta is a part of this and half the field gets swept up in a wreck, and then all of a sudden, guess who's in the Elite Eight? Corey LaJoy, and John Hunter Nemechek, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. are in the last eight of this thing.
But wouldn't that be the equivalent of an 11 seed going to the Elite Eight or Final Four? I know I love these stick and ball comparisons in this sport so much. I just wanted to throw that out there for
No
you.
one likes that either. No one likes that either, though. Here's the thing. Everyone loves a Cinderella winning a game or two, but heaven help us if Florida Atlantic and San Diego State make the Final Four, no one watches. Because you get to the Final Four, you want to see Duke, and you want to see Kentucky and UConn and UCLA. But when George Mason makes the Final Four, all of a sudden the TV ratings fall off a cliff. We
Yeah.
all love upsets until they make it deep enough to where we don't care anymore.
Yeah. Well, I get what you're coming where you're coming from there and what you're saying. And again, I know everybody loves March Madness. I know, but that tournament is what it is, and hopefully it's never going to change. And I know the '96 team rumors have been around for as long as I can remember. I feel like they were floating those out as early as 2008. So I think going from 65 to 68 was fine. You have a playing game in each part of the bracket, whatever. But the heart of the tournament is still the same, and I hope that it never changes. But if George Mason were to win two more games, are they really, the best team in college basketball,
No.
worthy of a national championship? Yeah, I mean, just the fact that it leaves the door open for that to maybe happen one day. Maybe I guess UCLA came close as an 11 seed
Yeah.
a couple of years ago. Then again, that's certainly a much more storied program than George Mason. They just happened to be an 11 seed that year. Um, just drawing it all back to NASCAR though with this announcement. I couldn't help but laugh a little bit as you and I were going back and forth yesterday because honestly, I don't feel like I disagree with anything you said. My my only difference between how you and I reacted is and maybe this is just apathy setting in here, but I just don't care. It's just like I'm at the point where we have all these for lack of better terms gimmicks because I know people don't like that word either, but we already have playoff racing. We already divide the races into stages, and they've changed the chase to the playoffs. They've changed green white checkers to overtime. I'm still not convinced that they're not going to follow the Coke 600 model and change stages into quarters
Oh, they
and just
should.
go. I mean, they might as well, right? And hey, more points on offer, right? Everybody is going to be happy about that, right? Um, I feel like with this right here, I've used up so much anger on what those other three things have done to me as a race fan that I feel like I just don't have any left for this in-season tournament. It's like, okay, you want to have a bracket in the middle of the regular season, and I think it is the perfect time to do it. Hype up the new TV partners coming in, give them something to get excited about. I think Chesapeake Diecast actually summed it up perfectly for me, and I followed it up by quoting his tweet. I like the in-season tournament more than the playoffs, and I don't think we need to have both. And that's kind of where I am with this. I feel like if you want to have, I do not think a bracket style tournament works in this sport where you have up to 40 competitors racing at once, and it's so chaotic that something completely out of your control can take you out. Like imagine, for example, if the Kansas City Chiefs and San Francisco 49ers are in the Super Bowl, and a Cleveland Browns defensive tackle comes out and tackles Patrick Mahomes out of nowhere, right? Like, I mean, it's a nonsensical analogy that people use. I think it's not a sport that works for that style of a tournament, so to speak. But I'd
Yeah,
rather it happen in the summer so that you can have your little in-season tournament champion or whatever. You can write that $1 million check, even though $1 million doesn't go nearly as far as it did in the 80s when Bill Elliott was winning the Winston Million. I have less problems with this than I already have with the playoffs. And so I guess that's my thing, is that at least this doesn't determine or alter the outcome of how we crown our season-ending champions. And again,
yeah,
no disrespect to Ryan Blaney, because again, I know North Carolina a little bit of local for you.
yeah.
Cool for him last year. Don't get me wrong, and every driver's got the same format that they have to race against. He did everything he needed to do. More power to him. But was he really the best and most consistent driver? I mean, I think even NASCAR.com had the headline like Ryan Blaney gets hot at the right time to clinch the championship at Phoenix, and that sort of thing. From a philosophical standpoint in this sport, that bothers me more than let's create this bracket in the middle of the season and just kind of see what happens here. Now, I don't know. Like I said, $1 million doesn't go as far as it used to. But there's the title of people throw the term Mickey Mouse around all the time. I'm sure that this title doesn't mean nearly as much as a Daytona 500 win or a Cup championship, but maybe there's some prestige that some drivers will take it a little bit more seriously than others. But I guess bottom line is, for me, is it necessary? Absolutely not. Would I rather we not go through with something like this? Of course, I definitely don't think we need it, but I also, at this point, with where the sport is in 2024, I just don't feel like I see the harm in introducing it either, and that's kind of why I think I'm indifferent towards it.
Well, I'll say this too. This is kind of another reason I wish we just didn't dip our toes into these waters. Like, I don't want to have these conversations. Like, what
Sure,
drivers are
yeah.
going to care about it and what drivers aren't, and what does it even mean? Like that was kind of basically what I thought when the NBA announced theirs. Like, what does it mean? Like,
Well, I
I
have an answer for you on that, but we'll save that for
I,
minutes here.
I honestly thought when it was being announced with the NBA, like this was going to mean something along the lines of we'll give you this will give you two better seating spots or something like that for the play, but it did none of that. It's like, well, what's the point? Like, what does it mean? And I'm kind of the same way here. Like, I mean, if it just means money, I guess it just means money, and no one's going to turn down $1 million. To your point, I don't know if anyone really cares about anyone winning $1 million anymore. It was cool at one point. Don't know if it really is anymore. And
Let me ask you this. I'm just sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
if they said the top prize is $3 million or $5 million, would that change your feelings
oh
towards
no,
this at all?
I don't think so. So I don't think so. Like, I don't know how many zeros you would have to put at the end of that to make me or you or whoever watching care. Because I mean, Chase Elliott could win $20 million. I don't think I would care any more or less about it. Uh, but so okay, so like the Lakers, they hung their banner for some reason. They hung a banner. The Los Angeles Lakers. Is someone going to put this banner up or put the trophy in the trophy case? Like, we are the NASCAR in-season tournament champions, and you know how we did it? We finished 21st at Michigan, 8 spots better than our opponent. Woo! But in doing
Well,
so, we fell 3 positions back in the championship standings.
yeah. Again, I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I don't know that I care enough at this point to share your outrage at it. But yeah, I mean, well, let's on that note. I mean, I guess we can start with the in-season tournament here. in the NBA, and then get to your general feelings
Hmm.
about the league, because I know you're not a particularly huge fan. Um, and I think I even responded to, because I remember you tweeted this after the Lakers won. Why should I care if a multimillionaire like a LeBron James or an Anthony Davis, wins a $500,000 bonus? And I think the counter to that is the in-season tournament. That prize money means a lot more to everybody else on the roster. And I just pulled up the Bleacher Report article from December 10th here. I don't know how many casual basketball fans are familiar with the names Colin Castleton, Alex
Oh,
Fudge, Demoy
oh,
Hodge. Um, the salaries that they're on, because they're two-way players with the Lakers G League team, floating back and forth between those two organizations, and fighting for their careers and a spot on an NBA roster. Well, now their salaries have pretty much doubled. I mean, that prize money means a lot to those players, and I think for the Pacers, who the Lakers defeated in the in-season tournament, but don't play in a much smaller market, obviously don't have as much star power as the Lakers do. I think those guys, certainly took the tournament seriously because, again, the money I think goes a lot further for them than it does for the superstars that everybody knows. So,
hmm.
like I told you yesterday, I've been known to change my mind and change my feelings on certain things as I see them unfold. And I was the same way when they first announced it. I was like, well, this seems a little bit silly, and who's going to take it all that seriously? I don't think it's that necessary, and do we really need to spice up the regular season? And then I saw it in action. I will say this: the special courts that they brought in are the ugliest
Oh,
eyesores imaginable. I hope that they do away with those, because it was not a fun experience watching on television. I don't know if it was any different in person. I never got to a game that was like that, but I can just watching it on TV. I get what they were trying to do to make it its own unique thing, but I don't think it was very well executed. But the actual tournament itself, I thought, led to some pretty exciting matchups, and created some storylines that you maybe wouldn't otherwise have. And I thought they did a decent job integrating it in with the regular season. I think the only game that didn't matter in terms of the regular season standings was the final between Los Angeles and Indiana. So again, it's not something I thought was necessary, but I understand why fans did enjoy it. Excuse me. And I have to say, I didn't come away with it by the end, having as many problems with it as I did going into it. So that's basically where I fell on that. Maybe similar to what that might be why, I don't really have too many strong feelings for NASCAR here, because I think it's probably going to be the same thing. It'll create some storylines, but at the end of the day, somebody might hang a banner in their shop and we can laugh about that, if we want to, but the focus is still going to be on the season as a whole and the championship predominantly, I think.
yeah. I would say from the NBA side of things. Now, I'll say this: I read an article. It was the Knicks and somebody, like the Knicks fans were like really caught up in it, like really caught up in advancing in the tournament, and like the tiebreaker was scoring differential, much like you see in these other in the European soccer events where goal difference is a big is a the first tiebreaker, and they're like watching the game from two other teams, hoping that the other team loses by an amount of points, and then they can win by an amount of points and make the difference up in goal difference. That's, I mean, that's like that's fun. That's something fun to think of, and of course, I think it also led to the Knicks playing their starters with 4 minutes left, and it was like a 24-point game, and they're still playing their
Yeah.
starters. That's kind of fun. Again, I struggle to feel. I struggle to understand what reason it serves, and I guess this goes into a larger issue, an overarching issue of why are we trying to change regular seasons is kind of the question I keep coming back to, because the baseball regular season, does it matter anymore? Like it used to be, it's a marathon and you get rewarded for the marathon. And I mean, you could go back to some amount of time where it was just four teams in the playoffs, and then it became eight, and then what, nine? I think nine, and then
Well,
what
10,
is
I
it
guess.
now?
Yeah. They wanted the game 163, I think, to be an annual thing. Because they went to 10, and I think now it's 12
Yeah.
with wild cards and everything. But
Yeah, I think it's
I think it was
12 now.
16 in 2020, but that was, a whole nother deal, obviously. But
Yeah, and baseball is letting teams in that across a 162 game, that's a huge sample size. You should know who your championship teams are after 162 games, 4
totally
or
agree.
8. 8 is got to be the max on that. Um, but who controlled that? That was TV. TV
Yeah.
controlled that. And then you're going into another issue with baseball of you're giving the top 2 teams a bye. Well, that doesn't give any advantage in baseball. Again, 162 games, you're playing every single day just about. Now you're letting the top 2 teams sit for a week or however long. And look what's happening. They're not winning their first series against the teams that are playing while the other team isn't. So the baseball regular season means almost nothing. We're trying to spice up the NBA regular season. I guess the NHL is going to do an in-season tournament. I guess I love the NHL regular season. Um, the NFL over the 3 or 4 years ago, 2 extra teams in the playoffs. College football, don't get me started with college football going to this 12-team playoff. Holy cow, it's ruined the regular season. Oh my gosh. The best teams in the SEC and Big Ten, or a top team in the SEC or Big Ten, they can lose 3 games now and make the playoff. Oh, it's horrible. It is
Yeah.
atrocious what college football has done to itself. Now you're going to. Let me pause. Michigan and Ohio State are now going to play the game. Then, because they're always at the top of the Big Ten, no matter who wins or loses that game, then they're going to play the next week in the Big Ten championship game. Both are still going to make the playoffs, and then they could play in the playoffs. So the game has turned into a game, one of 3 between Michigan and Ohio
Yeah.
State. What college football has done to itself is really criminal. And then college basketball would be doing the same thing if they went to 96 teams or 112 or whatever else is now being thrown. The point is, I don't know why what are we looking for from a regular season? The way I look at it, in my weird mind, everyone wants to just hit the fast forward button and get to the playoffs or get to the tournament or whatever. What I think we're starting to lose, the whole season, regular season playoffs, it's one thing. It's one big season. You have to perform in the regular season to make the playoffs. And I that's almost where I am now is we don't need to ruin the regular season in a search to make the playoffs better. And in the search of making a playoff better, I think we're kind of ruining the playoff. Because, again, going back to the college sports, which the NCAA is actively just trying to detonate collegiate athletics, does anybody want to sit here in a 96 team college basketball tournament and see this UConn team that we saw dominate the entire planet this year? Remember what they did to Stetson in the first round? You want to see that game twice? You want to see them play the 96th ranked team in the first round and then in the second round play the 52nd ranked team? How is that bettering the tournament? I think the same thing in college football. These first round games are going to be campus sites. And now you're making an opportunity for number 1 to play number 12 in the second round. I'm old enough to remember when number 1 Georgia smoked TCU 65-7 in the national championship game, and TCU was what, number 3, number 2? Do we
I
need
think
to
3
see?
because they would have beaten Michigan.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
do we need to see 1 versus 12 in the second round? College football is a weird sport
You
where
don't want to see Georgia take on Liberty?
no, I, I don't want to see them take on Florida State either.
Yeah. What? Total agreement there. And I think, to draw back to baseball, and I make this very clear to people that, tell me, well, every other sport has a playoff. Why shouldn't, you know, I'm not a fan of playoff expansion anywhere, like you were saying, and it wouldn't bother me at all if, we have 162 games. Just take the team with the best record in the American League and the best record in the National League, and let's just go straight to the World Series. Now,
Sure.
obviously, you get rid of all the playoff games, you get rid of all the TV broadcasts, you get rid of a lot of money for a lot of important people in suits, and that's why, it's just a pipe dream to go back to those days. But from a philosophical standpoint, again, wouldn't bother me at all if we did that. The really ironic thing about college football this year, this is what the playoff was supposed to try to avoid. The least controversial thing would have just been to take Michigan and Washington straight to a national championship game. But now you have Florida State, who's going through all these injuries and obviously isn't at full strength, and then you have Alabama and Georgia and what happened in the SEC and who's going to be in and who's going to be out, and um, it became the debate was just shifted instead of 2 versus 3. Now it was 4 versus 5 and 6, and who was going to get in, and then it's just going to be 12 and 13, I assume, next year, and then that doesn't even get into the fact, like you were mentioning. I think your friend Seth Eves really brought me around on this because I was saying, well, if there's any sport where I could stand playoff expansion, there are plenty of college football teams. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad, but to your point again, seeing what Georgia did to TCU and what other results have been in the CFP era. Yeah, I don't think 12 teams is necessary, and I think we can always have the argument and go back and forth with stronger conferences and strength of schedule and everything. But I don't see the need to continue to branch out as far as they have here, and I think it honestly will probably just be more of a waste of time than anything else at best, and lead to more injuries or opt-outs or whatever the case may be at worst.
Well, and of course, another thing that it's an expanded schedule, so now they're playing more games against the NFL, and it was just announced this week that the NFL is going to put a game on that Saturday night on NBC directly up against a college football playoff game. It's like, oh, Lord. But just to steer back to the NBA side of it, and I guess the overall part of this, from where I'm coming from, is if you're an NBA fan, you want to know how each team made the playoffs. Now, I get it. Watching a game in November between the Hornets and the Pistons doesn't exactly light your fire. I mean, I understand that. But that's the same thing in every sport. I mean, I don't know if many people are watching the Reds and the White Sox in July either. But I think somewhere, I don't know where, but somewhere we have just totally lost patience with a regular season. We just want to go straight into the playoffs with this. And I guess the NBA said, well, let's give our fans a form of playoffs, but it's not really playoffs and it really has no meaning, but you'll still get a trophy and a check. Maybe they're geniuses. I don't know, because baseball games don't get ratings in June in game 93 or whatever it is. So maybe they're geniuses, and I don't get why they're genius. I'm not smart enough to understand why they're so smart. But I mean, just enjoy the regular season. Enjoy the ride. What's the line? It's not the destination, but it's the whatever that line is. Just enjoy the regular season. Kind of where I am with NASCAR too, in every sport.
Yeah, and I get what you're coming from. So that's again the overarching question here, right? Because I've seen some of your tweets over the years, and I know generally speaking how you feel, but I think I don't know if it's still in your bio. It was at one time. I've really liked sports, right? I mean, you are a massive sports fan. You are a massive basketball fan. The college game in particular. What is it about the NBA that has you so disillusioned to the point where you hardly follow it, hardly tweet about it, could really care less what's going on in that league?
Well, I'll be upfront with the first part of this is I always liked hockey. Then I fell in love with hockey. That's part of it. That I think the better product is the National Hockey League, and I love watching hockey on a night in, night out basis. So that's probably part of it. I'll say that up front. I don't know. I've always said if I was if I was alive in the 80s and 90s, I would have just been the biggest NBA super fan. And with the 90s, forget about it. On NBC, Marv Albert and Bob Costas, and again, I'm going back to the media side of things on that. But I just would have been a
Sure.
super fan. And the teams and the storylines were so amazing. The Bad Boy Pistons and Bird and Magic, and then of course Jordan, and then Jordan retiring, and Hakeem Olajuwon and Houston winning 2 straight, and denying Patrick Ewing and the Knicks, and denying Shaq and Hardaway in Orlando, and then the three-peat. Just, oh, what unbelievable storylines. I just don't think they churn those storylines out anymore. And I don't know if it's this world of screaming and shouting on TV only about the Cowboys and the Lakers and the Yankees that have just turned me off, but I just feel like the NBA, if it's not the Lakers or the Celtics, it's like no one really cares. Now I don't now again, I've become so divorced from it. I don't know if it's still that way. I hope not though, because from everything that I can tell, the best teams now and for the next few years are going to be Oklahoma City and Minnesota and Indiana and these small market teams. They better be figuring out how to market their or how to sell their small market teams, because apparently they're going to be the lifeblood of the NBA for the next few years, which is great. I do hear about what Anthony Edwards is doing, and I mean how he's just taking the world by storm. God bless him. I could have never imagined that watching him at Georgia. I mean, that Georgia team was terrible, coached by Tom Crean, as it were. Um, I would have never anticipated that from Anthony Edwards. I'm assuming no one really would. But it just, I don't know if it's the lack of storylines. I know it's the lack of defense. I I know
Uh,
it's definitely that. Oh my
you, you know,
gosh.
I just saw. I think I just saw yesterday. I think the average scoring is down 8.5 or 9 points a game now that we're actually in the playoffs and they're actually trying to get some defensive stops and everything. Because I've heard that argument before, and I think it's a little bit of both. I think the star power. I think players are more offensively gifted than they've ever been. I mean, Steph Curry, I think, revolutionized how the game is played in many respects, and people are shooting a lot more threes than they are twos.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. But again, I think, this goes back to maybe perhaps the importance of the regular season. Now, I will note that my Philadelphia 76ers finished with 47 wins and got the 7th seed. The Knicks finished with 50 and got the 2nd seed. So if the Sixers could have just won 4 more games, maybe if Joel Embiid hadn't gotten hurt, I mean, you want to talk about the regular season mattering there. You just change the outcomes of a couple of games. It would have made a huge difference in terms of playoff seeding there. But um, kind of rambling here, not necessarily sure how to bring it back there. But I guess the lack of defense, I certainly understand, and that's you know how many 70-point games we have this year. I know Joel dropped 70. Luka, I think, had 73. Cat was on the same night, I think, flirting with I think he got to 62 or something like that. Before that game ended. But I certainly get that argument. There's no denying that scoring is higher than it's ever been, and the lack of defense
Yeah.
is very apparent.
I'll also say this too, and the Olympics are coming up. We're just a couple of months
Right.
away from the Olympics, and the United States has obviously put together, I mean, a dream team-esque roster, and they better have, because where I'm leading to on this, the world is catching up massively.
No doubt.
Oh, the world is just catching up in such a huge way. I'm thinking of all of the international superstars, and I want to leave people out too, because I'm doing this off memory. But you think of Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic and Victor Wembanyama, RJ Barrett will be on the Canadian team. And I know I'm leaving people out
Giannis.
on that. Yeah, yeah, Giannis. Um, so I can't wait to watch the Olympics actually, and I'm never going to root against the United States, but I can't wait to see if Spain and all of these other teams in France have they caught up to the United States the way we think that they have. It's going to be a fascinating tournament. It really is. Um, I don't think you should be expecting the U.S. to be winning every game by 54 again, even with the roster that they've put together. Uh, And another thing too, and you mentioned Steph Curry, and he's totally revolutionized the game, and on his part for the better. I mean, if you can shoot threes from anywhere and make them on such a consistent basis, God bless you, more power to you. Unfortunately, I think there's also a James Harden effect of just dribbling the air out of the ball, dribbling the life out of a game, and then settling for a step back 38 footer that rims off, and you do that half the game. I think that's. I've done enough AAU events. I've covered enough AAU events to know there's a lot of people that try to be Steph Curry that shouldn't, and try to be James Harden that shouldn't.
Yeah.
And oh gosh. And I think that's part of the fundamental breakdown of basketball in America. Now, they're not doing the same thing on the girls and the women's side. Girls are being taught from a very young age how to play basketball the way it was initially supposed to be played, but moving the ball, passing up a good shot for a better shot for a great shot, what have you. And obviously, we're seeing an extreme amount of boom from the women's game, which no one could have predicted. Caitlin Clark and what all the other great women's players have done have just totally exploded the women's game. It's a huge amount of it, obviously, is Caitlin. It's not all her. It's Angel Reese, and it's Juju Watkins, and it's Paige Beckers. And I mean, we've had superstars like that in the past in the women's game. I don't know if we had as many at one time to take, because, I mean, you look at all the great superstars we've had in women's college basketball the last couple of years. We've had some that's just as good, if not better. Candace Parker and uh, Brittany Griner. And we've had a lot of unbelievable women's college basketball players. I just don't know if they. Timing is everything.
Sure. Yeah.
And just timing has been perfect for this core of young women playing the game. They will beat all their opponents in the Olympics by 50. The U.S. women's team. Like,
Yeah.
we will be doing betting lines, the U.S. minus 57 and a half.
Yeah.
And they'll probably cover. Um, and the other thing too, I know I went off trail again. I'm bad for it. I'm sorry.
No, and no worries.
The other thing about the NBA too, is it just me, or is a lot of these superstars really unlikable? It's a lot of unlikable superstars
Yeah.
out there.
I think that's true to an extent in all sports. If you look hard enough, there's people
Yeah,
who
like Kyrie
look at that and
Irving
say,
just drives me up
yeah,
the wall. I mean,
yeah,
that guy, see, I mean, that he's just whoa. And you either love LeBron or you hate LeBron. You know what I hate? The people that love LeBron and hate LeBron clashing on social media. Oh, good
yeah,
Lord in heaven. That's the Nothing turns me off of social media more than when those two groups of people come together. Um, yeah, I don't love the superstars in a lot of ways. And load management, I know that's a big thing. I get it. Everybody gets it. Still doesn't mean you have to like it.
yeah. Well, and that's an interesting point too, because I go back, there was a year the year Wilt scored 100 points. Wilt Chamberlain, he averaged 48 and a half minutes per game that year. That's my all-time favorite. I mean, Wilt's 100 points, I don't even know if it's in the top five most unbreakable Wilt records. I mean, who knows if, Klay Thompson had his 37-point quarter in the first quarter and then he gets, to 55 by halftime. I mean, I don't think it's impossible in today's game, the way offense is played. If
Yeah.
it's just a random Tuesday night in February in the middle of the season in an otherwise meaningless game, if the Warriors are playing a team, with a 200 win percentage or whatever, I don't think it's impossible. I do think grabbing 55 rebounds is impossible. I think the game has just, evolved so far beyond, Wilt and Bill Russell's rebounding records. But to average 48 and a half minutes per game, I mean, there was one fourth quarter where Wilt got ejected. If he hadn't gotten ejected, he would have played every minute of every game plus overtime. That is, I think, the single most unbreakable Wilt record that there is. You're
Yeah,
never
that
going to see that again. And I just
no.
and what I don't understand is, like, Wilt's doing this in the 60s. When you didn't have, you know dozens of people, on your medical training staff who are there to monitor every little thing that you're doing and what you're eating and everything. And I don't even know if Gatorade was at the point where, certainly not where it is today. Um, and we have all of that now. We have guys taking nights off to the point where the league has stepped in to try to avoid that. And yet superstar injuries seem to be more prevalent than they've ever been. So that's something that's way above my pay grade. I don't know, but I have all the answers to that. But I get that it's certainly the fact that they try to go through this load management process to mitigate that, you know, for sure. Like, I mean, I remember when the Sixers were going through the process era, and that was right when Steph Curry was kind of rising to his,
Mm-hmm.
prime and superstardom. And I remember the Warriors, coming to Philadelphia trying to figure out, is there a way I can get to that game? It was probably the only Sixers game I would have wanted to go to that year because of how terrible the team was. But and I couldn't blame Steve Kerr if he said, well, this team is awful and terrible, and we want to probably going to win the game anyway. Steph, we're going to give you the night off. Well, how did all the Philadelphia basketball fans that
Yeah.
pay a lot of money to come see a top team and a top player, how would they feel about that? So I definitely get that. There's no doubt.
Yeah, that would be just terrible from a fan perspective, and I know that's been talked about for years now. Yeah, I think there's another thing too on the NBA side of, like, you can watch college basketball. I adore college basketball. I'll watch a college basketball game every day of the season, just about. And you can look at it. This is not good basketball on a lot of occasions. Like, these are 18-year-olds that have not been coached up well, or have not just been coached up enough, playing with a bunch of other young players. They don't gel, they haven't gelled yet, or whatever. It's bad basketball. But it just feels like in so many games, especially in the tournament, every every second matters, and they play defense as if their lives depend on it, and I love that part of it. I guess another thing too with the NBA, which they would struggle against, is when you look these days. Now, this wasn't always the case with Major League Baseball, of course, but when you look these days, the two big professional sports leagues in America is the NFL and the NBA. The NFL can't do anything wrong right now. I mean, Roger
Yeah.
Goodell, I mean, bless him, he's just
Well,
sitting on.
I wouldn't say the NFL can't do anything wrong. I think they've done a lot of things wrong over the last couple of decades here. And you want to talk about the media rights with Netflix on Christmas Day? Don't even get me started with that. But
Well,
from
yeah,
a ratings perspective, and this is why they're going to get away with that. From a ratings
yeah.
perspective, you're right. They can't. Football in general. I think the top 97 of the top 100 most watched telecasts. I think all but three of those football games were. I think three were college games, but the rest were all the NFL.
Yeah.
23 million people streaming Peacock in January. I mean, for crying out loud now.
And I mean, every sports fan that you talk to, they know at least one player from every NFL team. They might know multiple players from every NFL team, depending on, where your loyalty lies and what kind of fan you are. I mean, even the worst teams, you know that Bryce Young plays for the Panthers, and I mean, the superstars are so well uh, branded and sold to everybody, and it's the NBA. I think just subliminally in people's minds, they can't stand up to the NFL, but no one can. The other thing too is, to kind of piggyback off of that, the NFL draft is like a huge event. Can you believe, like, the spectacle that the NFL draft now is? They just
Uh,
put, what, 1 million people in Detroit or whatever it was a few weeks back. Meanwhile, the NBA draft, if you look at a mock NBA draft right now, would you know more than two people that's projected to go in the top 10? Because I did. I just, out of curiosity, I looked at a mock draft not too long ago. I don't know who these people are. Like, and a lot of them play either in the G League or internationally, and that's why I don't know who they are. Like, there's zero buzz around this draft. Didn't Atlanta just win the lottery, and, like, no one
yeah,
cares.
somehow, yeah.
Like, no one cares. They're not going to get a generational star. It's to the point, actually, where people are saying they should draft Bronny James because it would sell tickets and give
Yeah,
them a chance of getting LeBron. And it's like, well, I guess no one else
yeah,
is really. If you're thinking about drafting Bronny James #1, then the whole class, that's a referendum on what the
yeah,
class is because Bronny James.
yeah. Well, I think
Sorry.
yeah. I mean, time's going to be the best, the ultimate judge of the draft class because 2013 I think was considered one of the all-time weak classes. Our draft, selection, Michael Carter Williams won Rookie of the Year, and I still stand by them. I mean, the kid almost had a quadruple double in his debut. I mean, I think he showed a lot of promise with us, and if he hadn't been traded as part of the whole hinky process era the next season, I think that I don't, would he have been a generational superstar point guard? I don't think so, but he probably would have been better for his career if he had stayed with us for longer than he did. But I don't think anybody expected Giannis at 15 to become what he has. So maybe there's a sleeper in this draft or two. We'll know in a few years' time, I suppose. But yeah, I mean the Bronny James situation to me is very interesting because I mean the kid had a real health scare last summer. Is fortunate to even be alive, let alone playing basketball at a high level. So I think that needs to be considered in the fact that his college stats were, I think, a little bit underwhelming given, the last name on the back of his jersey and the fact that his legal name is LeBron James Jr. I think does him no favors there. And I've got to say, you were saying people either love or hate LeBron. I used to really not be a big LeBron James fan. I used to say, Michael Jordan's absolutely no doubt the greatest of all time. It's not even a debate. I'm not going to tell you LeBron wins the debate now. I think at the point, where he is now with 4 championships and, the fact that rings are a team achievement, you certainly can't hold '07 or, 15 or 18 against him. I don't think, given the competition he was going up against losing those finals. But, am I a LeBron James fan to a point where I'm going to go buy one of his jerseys? Probably not. But I do have a tremendous amount of respect for what he's accomplished and his longevity over the years. I think it's very much akin to what Tom Brady did in the NFL for so many years. But I will say he did Bronny no favors when he was interviewed several months ago and said, "Oh yeah, he'd be ready to help us with the Lakers right now, no question."
Yeah.
It's like, well, hold on, wait a second. The kid's averaging what, 5 points a game at USC, and he's fallen out of mock draft boards entirely. Now, but again, I think and maybe the fact that it is a weaker draft class might tempt some GMs here as well. He has said he wants to play with his son, for at least 1 or 2 years. Like, does just that possibility, given who LeBron James is, does a team with a mid-second round pick decide, we're going to take this kid on the sole condition that we might get his father
Oh,
to come along with him and we can sell out arenas and jerseys? And from a business standpoint, does it actually make a little bit of sense? I mean, these are real conversations that are being had.
I would bet you it wouldn't even take to mid-second round for that decision to be made. That is my very much less than expert opinion. I bet it wouldn't even take that long.
And what I'm hearing with the draft combine going on right now, I think he's surpassing a lot of expectations there. I think, you might be right. It might not even, there might be a team, with a late first round pick that decides, what the heck, especially if if it's a late first round pick, ideally those teams are already in a pretty good position. And then you have the
Yeah.
idea that, okay, if we play 40 chess here in our minds, can we maybe make this draft pick and then we get to add LeBron James to our core that we have here? That's, maybe just one piece of the puzzle away from, I mean, I don't know. It's an unprecedented situation because nobody's been this good for this long and nobody's had, we've seen it in baseball a couple of times, but there's never been a father-son pairing, to play at the same time in the NBA. So yeah,
So
it's going to be interesting what happens. No doubt there.
I just pulled up a mock draft, and this is from Bleacher Report. They have Portland at 14 picking Jacoby Walter. Jacoby Walter was a very strong Big 12 player at Baylor. He's not going to make Portland, marketably better. So why wouldn't Portland at 14 say, you know what? We're not getting better no matter who we're taking here. We're not getting light years better. This is not a franchise changing event for us. Let's take LeBron's son and let's just see if we can convince LeBron to come to Portland. What else is going on for Portland? I mean, God bless Portland. What else is going on for them? Why
Well,
wouldn't they do that?
not much since Lillard went to Milwaukee, I guess there's not been much to
Like, why
hear
would
about.
they not take a stab at it and see if it happens? There's a lot of teams I would think could come to that conclusion. I mean, well, Portland apparently has the 7 pick too. There you go. Use the 7 pick on someone that is really good, and use your 14 pick on Bronny James. Oh man, I could see Charlotte doing something like that too. Oh Lord, I could see Charlotte doing that. I don't. Oh, I don't want to live in this state if that's what's happening. Could you imagine? Could you imagine if LeBron is playing with his son, whatever team that is? ESPN's just going to gobble up all of their games. It's going to be
Oh,
ESPN2 is going to become ESPN LeBron just to watch him play with his son every game.
and you know what? I don't even know that I could blame him because the market is going to be there for that. Um, I don't know. I just again, it's I know it's impossible given who he is and who his father is, but I do just wish, we could let the kid be a kid, and I think it would
Yeah.
be better. I want to transition into this here as well because I think Bronny James absolutely would. The best thing long term for him would be another year playing college basketball, whether it's USC or otherwise.
Hmm.
I can tell you from a personal standpoint, WNBA season tips off tonight. I'm going to try to not go on for too long here because I actually want to catch a couple of those games. But um, women's basketball, you're absolutely right. It's absolutely exploded. The women's championship got more viewers than the men's for the first time ever this year. Which I think the most surreal part of that is that everybody expected that to happen. Um, Obviously the women's players all still they stay for 4 years. I know the transfer portal is still. I mean, look at what the Kavanaugh twins are doing right now. With staying, with your same team or your same school or whatever. I think it's just as out of control as it is in the men's game. But I've always found that one of the reasons it was harder for me to get in super invested into college basketball because of course I always watch March Madness. I always keep tabs on how Villanova and Florida in particular are doing, but the teams change so much year to year because now all the best players are one and dones and they
Hmm.
go straight into a draft or two and dones maybe and then they leave early and so there's less continuity whereas over in the women's game Caitlin Clark's been at Iowa for 4 years. Paige Beckers is obviously she got hurt and redshirted a year but she's going into her fifth year and I feel like you've been able to watch these young female players continue to grow and develop with in many cases the same surrounding core and the same coaching staff and everything. And it's easier to get invested long term, whereas there's so much more changeover in the men's game. Do you think that that's part of the reason why? Because of course, Caitlin Clark is a superstar, and I think that that's the biggest reason. But do you think that part of the reason why the women's game has grown so much is what I just mentioned, that it is easier to get more invested into these players and into these programs than it is on the men's side?
Yeah, 100%, 120% agree with you. Absolutely. Um, right now, it's an epidemic on the men's side because everyone is moving around so much. No longer is the main problem in men's college basketball the one and dones of Anthony Davis and Zion Williamson and insert other Kentucky and Duke players' names here of just staying in college 1 year and leaving. That's no longer the issue. The issue is that they leave where they are and just go to another place. Now, on some level, it gives teams hope that maybe you wouldn't have in past years. I mean, Michigan was awful last year. Michigan was just downright awful last year. They hire a new coach in Dusty May, and he's bringing in a lot of new transfers, including a couple that was with him at FAU. Michigan's going to be good this year. At least they should be. In the space of a year, they're going to go from one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. They should be a tournament team again next year. Um, so in that respect, it's giving teams more hope quicker to quickly uh, get good again. But on the other side, it's painful sometimes to try to keep up where all these players have been at. They've been at Wake Forest and they've been at Seton Hall and then they went to UTEP and then they went to Tennessee and Which, by the way, speaking of Tennessee, this is a good part of it. Dalton Knecht. No one knew who Dalton Knecht was 2 years ago. He was at Northern Colorado. No one had a clue who he was, and he goes to Tennessee, and he's the best player in the SEC. That's a good part of it. But yes, to your point, it is very difficult to latch on to a team when the roster is changing every year. Every year it's changing drastically. On the women's side, it said earlier, timing is everything. And they have just struck gold in this time period, women's basketball has, because you're right. Hasn't it felt to you like the mania around Caitlin Clark and Iowa basketball has been going on for years?
Yeah.
It's been going on for like 3 or 4 years. And well, because it has been.
I remember 2021 when Iowa played UConn in the Sweet 16. That was
Yeah.
I really wanted to watch that game because that was a big matchup back then. And then you look at where their careers have, gone over the last 3 years now. I mean, yeah, I mean, it gives me, I feel like there's a sense of pride that, I was on this bandwagon before,
Yeah.
it exploded the way it did.
The same thing's going to happen with Juju Watkins at USC. The
Yeah.
same thing's going to happen with her because she's spectacular. Now, we can debate what USC is as a brand of any other sport outside of football, but I think you're going to get a lot of people following her. They're moving to the Big Ten, so you're going to have her play games on a night in, night out basis against Iowa, which of course, who knows how good Iowa's going to be. Caitlin's no longer there. Lisa Bluder's no longer there. She just retired. But her games are going to be on Fox and NBC and Peacock. And they're going to be against Ohio State and Indiana. Sorry, but the conference realignment's driving me crazy.
Yeah.
Who else is it going to be against? It's going to be against a lot of good teams. Michigan State. And people are going to fall in love with Juju Watkins for very good reason. And it'll help that her games aren't on Pac-12 Network either. That'll really help.
Yeah.
But yeah, women's college basketball has just exploded. I am very intrigued to see if the carryover comes to the WNBA, because I don't think we're saying anything out of pocket or incorrect when I say it's just not been a popular sport for a long time.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you go up, I mean, there are people all across this country that are diehard sports fans. Would they have any clue what you were talking about if you said Atlanta Dream or Minnesota Lynx? Would you know what that is? I'll be very interested to see if this carries over to the WNBA, which season, as you said, as we record it, tips off tonight. I mean, from what I've heard, they made a WNBA version of a super team with the New York Liberty. Really didn't capture a lot of eyeballs.
Yeah. Well, and they met the Aces in the finals, and I think the Aces have their own version of a super team going as well. But yeah, I mean, I think you saw it in the draft. The draft brought in, all sorts of ratings records. I don't know, but they had ever gotten more than, I think, 600,000 viewers was, I think, the most ever tuned into a WNBA draft before. And then you had close to 2.5 million for this draft. And again, it's not just Caitlin Clark. There's plenty of other big names from women's college basketball that were a part of this class and will be a part of the next class with Paige Beckers, I think, headlining that one.
Yeah.
The next 2 to 3 years, I think, are very crucial and very interesting, and that is why I'm so excited that the Golden State team name Valkyries was unveiled today as well, and we've got a team coming to Toronto, still holding out hope for Philadelphia at some point. But I think that what you've seen with these roster cuts, I think there's an argument to be made that a WNBA roster might be one of the hardest rosters to make in professional sports.
Yeah.
Just because there are so many good women's college players, just as there are on the men's side of things. But Nika Mule fell to 14 with the Seattle Storm, and you go 14th in the NBA, you're a lottery pick. Whereas in the WNBA, you're an early second rounder, and she ended up making the team, which I think was good for her, and I'm excited to see what she can do this year. But there were some real questions. Is she going to be able to fit under the salary cap for Seattle, or how is that situation going to work? Is she necessarily a guarantee to make the team? A lot of people thought that she wasn't. Um, so I think that obviously having more teams, having more roster spots for some of these players, I think is only going to continue to go a long way in creating more storylines and creating more interest in the league. Because I can tell you right now, I mean, I don't know how Philadelphia doesn't have a team. With the
Oh,
basketball history in that city, and how excited the city gets for the Sixers and Villanova and Temple and Don
Don
Staley being
Staley.
a Philly. Like, yeah, there you go. Took the words right out of my mouth. I could see. I don't know if you could see this. I could see her leaving South Carolina to coach that expansion team if we ever get that.
I'm trying to figure out why there's not NBA or men's college teams not offering her a job.
Yeah,
Like the first thing I thought of when Calipari left Kentucky is make Don Staley say no, offer her a job, and maybe she says yes, and that what an amazing match that would be, especially for TV.
yeah.
But by the way, you mentioned it. I might be. Well, I know I am. I'm uneducated. Clearly, what is a Valkyrie?
I think
What?
it goes with the well, it's a character in the Thor franchise as well. I think it goes with the theme of the Warriors. I think is because a lot of teams have similar names to their NBA counterparts, like the Storm were a sister team to the Supersonics, although they haven't been around in years. But the Lynx was the Timberwolves.
Yeah,
I don't have a dictionary definition of Valkyrie, but I think it's supposed to be
I saw that.
a
I saw it
strong
earlier
female warrior. I
today.
think, and I think that goes with the Golden State Warriors
Okay.
theme a little bit. So
Well that would make sense then, and that's quite clever. I just didn't know what in the world it was. I
yeah.
had no clue what that was. So I'm glad you brought that up and told me what it was. But yeah, I'm interested in seeing if all of this follows through for the WNBA. I know ESPN carries their games. Now I don't know how many, but now I don't know who else their other partners are.
I think CBS has some, and I think Prime's trying to get into that space a little bit. But
I mean, if it's going to explode, then well, again, we could go. I could go deep into sports media on this and deep into the weeds. But I told a friend, said the first thing I would do if I was the WNBA, you play in the summer where there is a lack of things going on TV. I'd be cutting a deal right now with Fox and putting Gus Johnson on those games. I really would. I mean, I would be wanting Fox to cover these NBA games, and I would want Gus Johnson on them. You'd bring in so many people just from that alone.
it is certainly a critical few years for women's basketball, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see how it all plays out. Man, thank you again for joining me tonight. I'm sure
Yeah.
we're going to have you back here because there's no shortage of things to talk to you about, and that's why I enjoy talking to you, because I know we don't agree on everything, but I think we are very like-minded, and I appreciate hearing your perspective on what's going on, not just in the sports world, but in the sports media world, because I think that's a very underrated part of this whole equation here, and I think that you have some very insightful thoughts on that part of the world as well, and appreciate you coming on the show today to be able to have that conversation with me, because I think it's been long overdue.
Yes, anytime. Enjoy it. Enjoy talking about sports, especially sports media. Don't get to talk with that a lot to a lot of people with. So that's always exciting. I can next time we'll delve into Tony Romo.
Yeah, yeah, well, yeah, but again, like I said, we could go on about that. I mean, there's so much. I would love to just have an entire show where I just have a list of whether it's play-by-play analysts or color commentators or former athletes who've gone in the booth, just like list them off one by one. Just give me your thoughts, unfiltered on them. I think we could be here all day on that, and
Oh,
maybe I'll have to come up with a list, for next time you're on here, and we can have those conversations there. But Matthew, thanks again so much. I don't know if there's anything that you want to highlight or plug here with USRN or anything before we sign
no,
off.
no, thank you. I just appreciate being on and you having me on. It was a lot of fun. Always fun.
All right, that's Matthew Owens. Thank you again. Have a good one.